दिलों में प्यार की खुशबू तो होठों पर दुआ रखना। दिलों में प्यार की खुशबू तो होठों पर दुआ रखना। ईमान में वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना। ईमान में वक्त से एक रिश्ता।
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, everyone. Welcome back to Friday Sermon for Kids. We are here with you. Joining me this week to discuss this week's Friday Sermon is Tashif to my right, and to his right is Monis. Assalamu alaikum, guys.
Walaikum assalam.
Jazakumullah for being here. Now, dear audience, last week we talked about the beautiful success of the Jalsa Salana UK, but this week Hazur expanded it to show how Islam Ahmadiyyat's effect is truly global.
किस तरह अल्लाह ताला फजल फरमाता है, किस तरह अल्लाह ताला लोगों के दिलों को खोलता है जमात के बारे में, किस तरह ईमानों को मजबूत फरमाता है अल्लाह ताला, किस तरह दुश्मनों को नाकाम करता है। बेशुमार वाक़यात लोग लिखते रहते हैं। इनमें से चंद मैं आज भी बयान करूँगा, क्योंकि ये वाक़यात बहुत से अहमदियों के दिलों में ईमान की मजबूती का भी बायस बनते हैं।
So dear viewers, Hazur, may Allah be his helper, mentioned amazing stories from across the world of how Islam Ahmadiyyat is changing hearts right across the planet. That's our talk for today, but before that I come over to my panelists, whom I have to ask, as I do every single week, what's your new event point, Tashif?
I found that Ahmadis in Pakistan are banned from reading and listening to the Holy Quran. But ironically, the Quran is the exact reason Islam's message is spreading throughout the world.
MashaAllah, very nice point. Monis, what do you have?
The new thing I learned from beloved Hazrat's Friday sermon was that the only way to do tabligh in Islam is through patience.
MashaAllah, wonderful points, guys. We're going to go in more details and discover new stories. But before that, we got to come over to you, dear audience, for which we go straight to Kids Take.
In today's Friday sermon, beloved Azur continued from last Friday's sermon about the blessings of Jalsa Salana. In today's Friday sermon, how good is Jalsa Salana UK?
In today's Friday sermon, beloved Azur, Ayatollah Benassi said that it is only the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat which truly strive to enlighten people about the true status and teachings of the Holy Quran.
From the Friday sermon, I learned that the Prophet Messiah ﷺ said, you should read my books before you make your decision about Ahmadi Muslim.
Jazakumullah ahsan al-jaza for those beautiful videos. Now remember, if we haven't made this clear before, let me make this very, very clear. You are the ones that create Kids Take segments. So if you forgot to send a video, make sure to send one in next week. Okay, it is time for our discussion.
This sermon had a lot of stories about people discovering new things about Islam. We should probably dive right into those.
Yeah, who was that Imam from Africa that heard bad things about the Jamaat?
Agree with both of you, and that's a very, very beautiful story. Zur mentioned that in the country of Guinea-Bissau, this is in Africa, there was a certain Sunni Imam, so he was an Ahmadi, and he had been told by other non-Ahmadi Muslims that these Ahmadis, they're not really Muslims, they don't believe in the Quran, they don't have anything to do with the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's teachings, right? They reject the Quran, right? And that's what he used to basically think about Ahmadis. But he recently ended up watching the live broadcast of Hazur's speeches for Jalsa Salana UK 2023, and when he saw that, it occurred to him that Ahmadis entirely believe in the Quran, because Hazur's talking about the Quran and Hadith left, right and center all over the place. He's quoting, he's doing tilawat, and that completely changed his mind. That's when he started doing his research, and he came to the conclusion that not only do Ahmadis believe in the Quran, they're the ones that best understand the Quran, and they're the ones doing the most work trying to spread the message of Islam Ahmadiyyat. So he ended up converting to the Jamaat. So Hazur said this shows how people who are sincere when they're researching about Islam Ahmadiyyat, they ultimately find the truth.
Alhamdulillah. Do you remember that story where the Jamaat could not build a masjid?
Which one is that again?
Oh, I think it was in a place where the local people did not like Islam.
Yeah, and so no one wanted a masjid in town.
Ah, I remember now. Azur mentioned the story. This is from another African country. This country's name is Liberia. And in that country, there's one smaller county that is named Nimba. And in that county, there was basically a lot of Christians, no Muslims, but a very small Jamaat had formed. And those Ahmadis wanted to build a masjid there. Now the problem is there were only two types of people there, right? There were people that were Christians and those that were not Christians, who were not even Muslims. That time, right, all of those people were like, we do not want a masjid here. Muslims are all about, terrorism and violence. We don't want any of that in our town. But at that same time, a certain person named Mr. Dan came forward. And that Mr. Dan was a law mazhab person.
Law, what?
Yeah, Marbi Sahib, that went in this ear and slipped through this end.
Well, we are going to take it and put it right back into our heads. But I think you guys know what time it is.
Got you, Marbi Sahib. All right, Usman.
Take it away with the word of the sermon.
Jazakallah, guys. So the phrase La Mazhab is actually made of two originally Arabic words. The word La means non or no, and the word Mazhab means religion. Put them together, you get no religion. This word is used in Urdu to describe someone who does not follow any specific religion. We say they are La Mazhab. Up next, you're about to find out how Islam Ahmadiyyat deeply affected one such person and changed their life forever. Back to you guys.
Wow, I didn't even know there were people like that in Africa.
Yeah, but what happened to that La Mazhab person?
Well, here's what happened. Hazur mentioned that law mazhab person, Mr. Dan, he ended up finding out that the Ahmadis were looking to build a masjid somewhere, but nobody wanted to help them in any way. Nobody was selling them land in that sense. So he came forward and he said, I don't believe in any religion, right? But this Ahmadi missionary, from the time that he's been here, he's treated me with such kindness and love that, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give my own land that I wanted to build my house on, to him, so that he can build a masjid, right? Because despite the fact that I am not following any religion, I'm always drinking alcohol and I don't even care about religion, he's treated me so kindly and respectfully, right? So he gave his own land to the Ahmadis. They ended up building a masjid there, and this Mr. Dan person, who was La Mazhab, he was so affected by the Jamaat's good work and character that he ended up becoming a Muslim and ended up letting go of alcohol. This shows how Islam Ahmadiyya truly changed this person's life.
That's a beautiful ending. But there were also stories of people opposing the Jamaat, right?
Absolutely, Monis. One story that I remember immediately is from the country of Congo Kinshasa, also in Africa. There was basically our own missionary, a muallim, right, from the Jamaat, who went to the province of Maindombe, right? This is somewhere in central Congo. Went there. He started talking about Islam Ahmadiyya to the local people. Now, there were local people who were Muslims, but they were anti-Ahmadi. And when that Ahmadi Muallim was trying to do tabligh, many of those youngsters that were anti-Ahmadi, they started to throw rocks at basically the small gathering, right, where people were listening to the Ahmadi scholar. But the Ahmadi missionary very, very patiently stayed there and kept doing his work and speaking to them kindly, right? He wasn't fazed by the opposition. And that affected the local people's minds, right? They're like, okay, this person really is honest and he's not trying to start a fight or anything.
That is wonderful to hear, but can we talk about how Ahmadis are spreading the message of the Quran?
We absolutely should be talking about that, Tashif, but not without diving into our next incredible segment, for which, dear audience, we take you straight to the question of the sermon. Okay, dear audience, we are back at the question of the sermon. Let's dive straight into the question. Okay, so the question this week is, what did Hazur mention Ahmadi Muslims are banned from doing in Pakistan? Option number 1, publishing the Holy Quran. Option number 2, reading the Holy Quran. Option number 3, even listening to the Holy Quran. Option number 4, All of the above. Time starts now. Time's up. Tashif, what do you think?
I think it's option number 4, all of the above.
I
Yes?
think it's option number 2, reading the Quran.
And the correct answer is option number 4.
Alhamdulillah.
That's such a sad thing. May Allah guide these ignorant people.
Ameen. But on a much lighter note, Islam Ahmadiyyat is spreading the message of the Quran around the world despite all its hardships.
No doubt there, Tashif. Hazur even mentioned a story about how the Jamaat's translation amongst educated people who truly want to research the Quran is far more accepted and it makes more sense. One story is of an Ahmadi from the country of Tanzania, where that Ahmadi says that he got a call from a village, right, 30 kilometers away from where he lived, where the person needed a translation of the Holy Quran in the Swahili language. The Swahili language, it's a language spoken by millions of people in East Africa, Tanzania being one of those countries. He wanted the translation and he specifically said, he says that nearby my village, I can get other translations in Swahili because Swahili is spoken by millions of people, right? But he said, I only want your community's translation. You Ahmadi Muslims, the translation that you have done makes so much more sense. And that's the only reason I want to read your translation. Another story from the same continent. But now we go over to the country of Mali, where they speak French. And so there was a debate that ended up happening between an Ahmadi and a non-Ahmadi French speaker. Basically, the talk was that, who has a better translation? And obviously, the person that's not Ahmadi, he said that, you guys don't even have the right translation, you don't follow the right guidance on what the Quran says, and so on and so forth. But then that Muallim, that Ahmadi, told him, how about you come and sit down and we actually look at the Quran and we actually look at who does a better job explaining the actual words of the Quran, right, in the translation. And they did that. And that non-Ahmadi, he had a good clean heart. He wasn't like an Ahmadi hater. He had a good heart. So that individual sat down, he saw the translations, and he was forced to admit that, you know what, you guys actually have a much better translation. You guys tend to translate words a lot better, and they're a lot easier to understand as well. So even those people have to admit that the Jamaat does far more service of explaining the Holy Quran to the world.
Completely agree, Marabi Sahib, but we should definitely go over that story from Burkina Faso.
Oh, that was a very faith-inspiring story. Azur mentioned that in the country of Burkina Faso, it's very dangerous in that area. There's a lot of terrorists that go around, and some of these areas are basically life-threatening for Ahmadis. So there's a story of one Ahmadi who lived in a village in Burkina Faso, and one day certain Wahhabis are like a very hardliner sect within Islam, right? Most of them are very anti-Ahmadis. They just came to his door one day, knocked the door, and they told him, leave Islam Ahmadiyyat. And he said, I'll leave it when I die. You're not going to see me leave Islam Ahmadiyyat until life basically leaves me, right? And he's like, I'm going to stay with it until my death. So they told him, you better leave Islam Ahmadiyyat, otherwise we're going to come back and you're not going to like it. We're going to hurt you. And what happened was, many people told him, what are you doing here, right? Don't stay here and stuff like that. But he said, you know what? I want to pray over this. So that night, he ended up praying a lot. He ended up praying. And throughout that night when he was praying, right, he says that in the dream that he had after he was done his prayer, somebody named Ismail came to him and told him, go to Dori. Dori is the name of a town away from that village, right? It's a bigger town, it's not a village, there's more people and so on, safety. And that's the message he got. And he said, as soon as that, person named Ismail told me that, right, I ended up waking up, I packed everything, and I left. And he's like, when I got there, right, as soon as I got there, I found out that back in my house, back in my village, right, that next day, terrorists had basically come to find out where I was. And they were planning on essentially killing me. And he sincerely believes that it was Allah that ended up saving him through that dream.
Alhamdulillah.
Well, viewers, these were just a few from the incredible stories that were far more in number that Hazur narrated in this week's sermon. That's why we tell you, watch the full khutbah and get back to us with
The Old Critical Message.
Did you enjoy this week's Friday Sermon for Kids? Want to know how you can make it even better? Tell us what you learned from beloved Hazur's Friday Sermon and send your videos at fsforkids@mta.tv no later than every Sunday, and we'll try our best to include them in our next show.
Now, we can't include all the videos you sent to us, but you can see them all on our Instagram and Twitter at MTA Canada. Remember, at Friday Sermon for Kids, you're not just the audience, you make the show. See you next week.
Okay, everyone, it's time once more for our review of this week's sermon. As always, pay close attention.
Beloved Hazur, may Allah be his helper, presented beautiful and faith-inspiring stories of people being enlightened by the teachings of Islam Ahmadiyyat from around the world. One example is of Sunni Imam from Guinea-Bissau who used to think Ahmadis have nothing to do with the Quran. He listened to Hazur's speech from Jalsa on MTA and realized Ahmadi Muslims completely live by the Quran. Then there were stories from people across Europe who had no idea what Islam is except violence. But from Jamaat stalls and exhibitions, their minds were completely changed.
Another story from Liberia Hazur told was about Jamaat trying to build a masjid in the county of Nimba, but the Christians opposed it. Then a La Mazhab person, or someone who didn't follow any religion, came and said he would give his own land for Jamaat to build a masjid because Ahmadis were extremely kind and respectful, despite the fact that he was always drunk and did not believe in their religion. Now he has stopped drinking and even became an Ahmadi Muslim.
Hazur, may Allah be his helper, mentioned that in countries like Pakistan, the government has even banned us from even listening to the Holy Quran. This, on one hand, shows how terribly out of touch the Pakistani state is from true Islam, but on the other brighter note, it shows that in other parts of the world, Allah is enabling us Ahmadi Muslims to publish and present all the guidance of the Holy Quran. Hazur presented stories from across the world of how people who are not even Ahmadi agree that the Ahmadi translations are more logical and make it easier to understand the true teachings of Islam. Towards the end, Hazur announced the funeral prayer of some devoted Ahmadi Muslims, including Amatul Hadi Sahiba, who was the daughter of Mir Muhammad Ismail Sahib, and there was Saqib Kamran Sahib, who was a long-time Waqf-e-Zindagi, and there was Dr. Muhammad Ishaq Dauda Sahib, who was a pioneer and scholar Ahmadi from Benin. May Allah elevate all of their status.
Ameen.
Well, dear viewers, these are just a few points from the ocean of guidance that is beloved Hazur's Friday sermon. So,
make sure to watch the full Friday sermon.
And until next week,
Khuda Hafiz.
मगर है शर्त तुमसे मुसलसल राबता रखना, मगर है शर्त तुम उससे मुसलसल राबता रखना, इमाम वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना, दिलों में प्यार की खुशबू तो होठों पर दुआ रखना, इमाम वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना, इमाम वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना।